Today I wanted to share a little story about a time I picked up a hitchhiker at 2 a.m. in the morning. And what happened was, it was after a late night of studying, and I was, just feeling tired and felt like, okay, I need to get home. And I was driving along the freeway, and all of a sudden I see this guy with his thumb out. And I never picked up a hitchhiker before, but for some reason I just felt compelled to do it this time. I don't know, maybe I was tired, maybe I was just misguided, or maybe I just was being sympathetic to his situation. But I pulled over, ended up having a nice conversation with the guy, drove him about 10 kilometers down the road, and we went on our way. And I can't help but wonder, did I get lucky? Maybe this guy was looking for an easier victim who wasn't someone that's 6'5" and way bigger than him. Or maybe he really was a nice guy and his story totally checked out. I've yet to pick up another hitchhiker, so I don't know, maybe this was the safe guy and the next one's the one that's gonna rob me. I'm not sure. But what's interesting, this story reminds me of this little hypothetical situation. And it's about two people who pick up hitchhikers. And on one hand, you have Mr. Brown. And Mr. Brown always picks up hitchhikers. It's just something he does. It's something that's part of who he is. And one day he picks up a hitchhiker, he gets robbed. And on the other hand, you have Mr. Smith, and Mr. Smith never picks up hitchhikers. It's crazy, we wouldn't do it, but one time he sees this guy on the side of the road and it's raining and he feels terrible and he picks up the guy and he gets robbed. Now, who do you think is going to experience more regret over their decision? Mr. Smith, right? Because like most people, we expect to have a negative outcome or negative emotional reaction like regret when we do something that differentiates from our normal behavior, when we do something that takes action rather than inaction, right? When things just happen to us, we don't have regret, but when we do something that causes a negative outcome, we experience a lot more regret. And this is why Mr. Smith in this situation would be much more regretful over his decision rather than Mr. Brown. So what does this matter? What does it have to do with you being an athlete in your life? Well, for athletes, it has a lot of unspoken implications. And for any athlete or anyone really who is trying to achieve great things and get better, there's a certain amount of risky behavior required, right? In order to improve at a skill, you have to be also willing to, make mistakes. You have to be willing to put yourself out there. In other words, if you want to be the person that hits that game-winning shot, you also have to risk being the person that misses that game-winning shot. And right, you have to be ready to take some action, that could lead to positive things, but you also have to be prepared for the consequences of missing or failing, right? You can't have one without the other. And so here's kind of where this internal battle will really come up for you, is that it'll be tempting to kind of just play it safe, right? To go with the easy choice and just kind of stick with what you know and sort of just show up. But what most people won't tell you is that this can lead to a worse fate down the line, right? This is the path that leads to a feeling of regret that you can't come back from, something you can't change, and it leads to a path of achieving nothing meaningful. And, when I picked up that hitchhiker, I knew the risks, but I did it anyways. And I didn't do it because I wanted the cool story. I wanted to tell people, although that's what I'm doing right now, but I did it because it felt like the right thing to do. And when it comes to you moving forward in your athletic endeavors, you have to be willing to accept a certain amount of risk and risky behavior and the possibility of negative outcomes if you want to achieve the positive ones. You can't have one without the other. And the more you put yourself in a line of fire of risk and uncertainty, the more comfortable you'll become with it. You'll become like Mr. Brown, who this is just something he does, right? Picking up hitchhikers is just part of his routine, and the failure or getting robbed is kind of just an assumed consequence. And the less regret he would experience and the less regret you would experience over doing things that are sketchy or risky or have a high risk of failure. But then you start to get comfortable with that and you start to grow. And so at the end of the day, set a goal that you might fail to achieve. Go out there with the mindset that this might not work out, but it could also work out much more extraordinarily than I ever would have hoped, and it'll lead to the things I want. And so kind of coming back to the thought of a hitchhiker, when you see, risk and uncertainty and discomfort standing on the side of the road, imagine them as little people standing there with their thumbs out and they're looking for a ride. Don't just pass them by. Pull the car over, open the door, and tell them to come along for the ride, because you'll be surprised just how far they might take you.